Folks, episode 44. You are more than welcome back to another episode of the Friday Flows. And we've got a second appearance from none other than Meg, all the way from Seattle. Meg, what's going on? How are we doing?
Hey there, Cameron. Doing well. Almost sunny day in Seattle.
Nice, nice. It's a little bit better than the pitch black at 4 or 5 p.m. that I'm dealing with here in Ireland. So um, all good there. So, folks, today what we're looking to cover is two things. First off, this will be released in very, very quick succession to the AWS Dev Day that Tynes is going to be running. So I'm going to have Meg run through all the details on that, and then we're going to run through a nice use case around AWS related to that as well. For anyone that isn't aware of the partnership that we have with AWS, basically teams will use this in a multitude of ways to automate off the back end of AWS use cases. And again, a really, really interesting partnership. So looking forward to getting into it. Meg, what are we running through today?
All right. Well, we're going to talk about how you could identify and deactivate IAM keys that have been hanging around too long. And as you said pretty perfectly there, a lot of folks are trying to automate what they're doing in AWS, and a lot of folks are doing stuff in AWS. We at Tynes are completely built on AWS. If you are built on AWS or have adopted a multi-cloud strategy, you're probably already thinking about automation. You might already be thinking about automation with Tynes. We've got a great event coming up called Dev Day. It's going to be next week in New York City. As Cameron said, it's the 14th. So if you're free next Thursday or someone you know is, go ahead and send them our way. And the story I'm about to show you is one that we'll build together. I will show you everything we need in order to do that. And if you show up on Thursday, you'll get to meet some awesome people, and I'll even buy you lunch. Quick note on all of that. Again, here are the dates. I will drop a link in the chat or have Cameron do so that everybody can access that along with the recording of this. But why would we do something like this in the first place? Well, anything you're doing with AWS, you can automate with Tynes. One of the lovely things about AWS is any service that you might use in their entire ecosystem is going to have an API that makes it accessible to Tynes. Now, if you know Tynes, or even if you don't yet, if we have an API connection to an endpoint, we are good to go. We can pull data, we can push data, we can manipulate it, anything that you might want to do. On the screen in front of you, just a quick idea of why we think Tynes and AWS work so well together. And if they're in your environment, they'll make each other better together. You can take any of those sources, like I was saying. Some of the most common ones that we hear are security tools, things like AWS Guard Duty, but also things that sit outside of the security space, your Lambdas, for example. Anything in the AWS environment, like I said, you can automate with Tynes. What kinds of automations can you think about here? Well, basically anything. We started in security, but we do a ton of work with IT teams, network teams, and in those cross-functional spaces, right? Network security, not necessarily something that either team is going to be able to own entirely. And if they want to work together on it, Tynes can make that a little bit easier. So whatever other tech you're using, we don't rely on pre-built connectors, and we are completely integration agnostic. So we can connect to what you're already using in that nice tech stack. And then whatever else you're using in terms of the workflows that you have, zero trust, a chat ops strategy. Maybe you're, again, having a DevOps functionality where your infrastructure team and your engineering team are working together. Any of those workflows that you want to build, great. You can make use of the best-in-class AI that Tynes has to offer, which, like I said, we're built completely on AWS, so it should really not come as a surprise that when we needed to host our own models, bring everything in-house so that we can bring folks completely stateless AI that never interacts with a public network. We built that all on AWS Bedrock. And then we can also send over to AWS. So you heard me talk about it at length there. We can consume from anywhere in AWS, and that means we can send anywhere. We can, put data that you need into your EC2 instances in order to manage that CI/CD process that DevOps team might be responsible for. You'll see me do some cool stuff with AWS IAM today. Again, if you're using AWS for IAM or key management, these are great things that you might want to auto rotate just to develop a more secure operating posture around. So this is why we thought it was worthwhile. There clearly is no end to what you can do with Tynes and AWS, so we thought let's help people do it and show them how. Who's it going to be? Well, I'll be there, so you can always come say hi to me. We will also be led by the wonderful Kevin Davis. He leads our West Coast Solutions engineering team. Sorry, North American solutions engineering team. I demoted him there for a second. He's fabulous, and he'll be running folks through 2 different labs. Ashok and myself will be filtering around the room and helping people. Ashok is one of our wonderful solutions architects on the AWS side. We'll be joined by Jen Riken, who will be our host for the day and manages all of our AWS partnerships here at Times.
Quick
So,
question before we jump into that then. Just
yes,
before we dig into the workshop, if I'm somebody that is interested, obviously using AWS in a various or sorry, in a few different ways, to come to a day like this, obviously if I have no experience with Tines, does that matter? Like what's the expectation for anyone looking to attend?
honestly, it would be a perfect thing to show up to if you have no experience, if you have a buddy with a little bit of experience. All these folks are going to be welcome, and we're going to be starting from how do we build one of these stories together collaboratively? So you'll leave the room with 2 full AWS stories. If you're going, I have none and I'd like to have a couple. If you're going, I have a couple, but not these 2, great. Both audiences that we would want in the room. We also are going to have a couple of us there live and in person. So if you've built one of them and then would love to spend that second lab 2 time just, overdriving on it and adding functionality like, messaging on Slack or Microsoft Teams to it, another great opportunity to do that where you have, I think, yeah, at least 3 or 4 Tinos in the room to help you out.
Awesome.
Great. So our objectives really will be to build something together, and you don't have to be coming from a lot of experience to do that. Tines is very easy and quick to learn, and these stories will come together in just about 2 hours. So here's the link that I'll follow up with. Anybody can register. Please send it to your friends. And what are we actually going to be building? Well, here is one of those stories. Just to give you an idea, this is a story that you could easily get from the Tines story library. So I can always come into this library, search for AWS, and find just dozens of pre-built stories that I could grab. If you want to learn how to build in Tines, we'll be taking this one and starting from scratch together. You'll see this very commonly with anything that you import from the library or nice things that solutions engineers like myself drop on you. There might be a little to-do list, things that you need in order for this story to be successful. Here you can see we need an AWS role-based credential. That's one of those nice things we'll be taking care of. We'll all be building in a collaborative environment next Thursday. So if you're thinking, I don't have an AWS environment or I have a ton of clearance I need to get through to start building, great reason to come to the workshop on Thursday. We will be providing both of these things that you need. And that's going to make it easy to make these calls out to AWS to do things like grab your IAM users. Here we found 28 users. That's why you're seeing an event move through here, bust out into 28 individual items. And I've got my 28 users. So now I want to see what IAM keys they have associated with them. This is that second request that's going out to AWS. And this is again where if you've never seen Tines before, you might be looking at this and saying, oh, wow, that looks similar to something like Postman. Yep, we've got the full functionality of a modern API development and testing platform basically locked and loaded into this one little action. What's great about this here as well is you can see I'm using that AWS credential, and I don't mind showing it to you because it's completely obfuscated, like every credential you add to Tines. So here we're grabbing the access keys associated with these 28 users. And you can see here that my flow branches, and I have a way to handle users that have multiple access keys associated with them and users that have just a single access key associated with them. This is great because we can see across those 28 users, we've identified a couple that had multiple keys and we needed to go grab. If the key is active, that's the only time we really care about it here. We'll come over here and see that it might need to be deactivated if it's a certain amount old. We're going to work together to set up how long, right, we think a stale access key is. And we can make that call out to AWS together to actually deactivate the key. And you'll notice that I didn't have to hard code in any values here. This is handling any of these, keys that I've identified in the previous steps associated with those users. And it's just rolling through all of them, making the calls out to AWS. And as long as I get a 200 back, I'm always going to be able to see everything I get back from my APIs here. We can see all of those different calls I made or actions I took listed out here in the JSON. And here we can see that I was able to update a particular key. And if I needed to do something like even go back and add that to a log somewhere, that's something I'd be able to do. So this is the first story that we're going to be building out on Thursday. And I think, yep, if I hop in here, we can see the other one that we'll be working on. The other one is probably going to be us focusing on how to take an S3 bucket that is public and in a very quick and easy way, run through a similar set of events to what you saw there and make it private. This one's going to have a slightly different ingestion method. Here we're using a webhook, where here we were making a call out to AWS that we might want to do something like schedule, but that's the kind of thing that you'll need to have a working story live in production to do. This is just my draft that I've been working on and that we'll be publishing together on Thursday. So if folks have questions, I know they can always get in touch with me or Cameron via LinkedIn if they found this recording somewhere. Hopefully you guys also come and register for the Dev Day that we're having with AWS next Thursday. You're more than welcome. Any of your friends, we'd love to see them. And thanks as always to Cameron for hosting these. It's always a lot of fun to get on here and show folks stuff.
You better believe it. Nice one, Meg. Meg, do you want to just jump back into the story? I've actually just a personal question on this one, right? When I So when people, I've seen use cases where obviously, monitoring infrastructure is automated in times, right? So like this is a clear use of like branching logic where we're able to say, right, multiple access keys, single access keys, and then be able to create criteria around how long that access key, how are you within the workflow? What is the criteria for a credential or an access key being deactivated? What's the time frame we're looking at here? And I suppose the reason I'm asking that is it seems like a use case that kind of needs to be automated to be handled properly. Because like if you're doing this manually, like how are you even seeing, you know what I mean, how long someone's had access to something for? Seems like a bit of a nightmare to do manually.
That is absolutely something that we would want to exactly figure out in a way that's custom to our use case, right? I
Yeah,
appreciate the question because it's not going to be, again, one size fits all for every business, but it's
yeah.
not something that's so a human being needs to go and look at that date every single time that we'd want to spend one of, someone's highly paid and highly qualified analyst's time on. So here, for example, you could see that we were just getting back the date in the exploding of the access keys. So when we get these individual access keys up here, we turn them into things that we can look at one at a time. So we could do something like compare their date. Here, we're just looking at the access key is active. And like I said, if we were having this run the way I have it right now, I click run, it does this for me. It's completely fine in this not so much autonomous state. But like you said, the point of automation is to have really, again, autonomous action taken on your behalf, doing what you might not want to do. So let's make that change that I was saying we'd do to send it out into production. If it's going to repeat once a day, again, we're going to want to have a cadence that looks back over probably a certain number of days. So it's really as simple as me publishing that story like you saw, adding a schedule, which you can now see reflected by that little icon that shows the clock, and then coming in here to this trigger state and saying that we're going to look at the date for an access key being created, and we're probably going to say it's equal or greater than a certain number, a certain date that we care about it being out of date. Let's say
Mm,
that we want that to be something that's maybe floating, right? This is where we want that to be less than or equal to, and we could come in here and even like do a little bit of, hey, times do the math for me moment, where we say now -1, for example. This is where I'm going to have to give it the right format and it's going to trigger me on that. But it's just a quick and dirty example of how, even if I wasn't wanting to hard code a date in here where we think something is, stale after a certain amount of time, I could come in here and use something like the now syntax in order to say, hey, give me a current date and time so I can say anything that's less than 10 from today, right? So just
awesome.
we could set that again. We could have a bunch of different branches here, as you guys probably well know if we're automating this one thing and saying, hey, it's 10 days old. We probably want to do things like, in addition to deactivating the key, maybe deactivate and then delete. But those are the kinds of things that somebody can set with us or set by themselves when they get this story in their own environment.
Awesome. Great stuff. Thank you for clarifying. So, folks, AWS Dev Day with Tines, November 14th. The team are great. It's going to be great. I'll link it in the comments below. Make sure to check that out. As always, folks, if you enjoyed this, please like and repost to your network. We always appreciate your viewership. And yeah, as always, Meg, legend. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cam. You the best.
All right. Thanks, folks.